All right. So we will cover basically how to safely strength train today if you have an injury. So before I get started with this, how many of you have downloaded your strength training plan yet? So you can type that in the chat. Have you downloaded your strength training plan yet? These plans get updated each month, so I'm curious if you've downloaded those yet. Yeah, all right. Good. I'm glad to hear that everyone has downloaded those, or at least a lot of you have. I tried to make that a very joint-friendly training plan, meaning even if something I think is going to be bothering your joints, I show you how to modify the exercise. So if you haven't downloaded the plans yet, please go ahead and do that. I would take a look at that. So I'm going to talk about injuries in these general terms. We could say just like acute aches and pains, something that's not really a chronic thing. It just hasn't lasted for more than a few weeks. We can also talk about more chronic issues. For example, maybe I have chronic low back pain. Maybe I have chronic knee pain. So it's not like I have like a torn an ACL or anything like that. It's just general pain. There's also, we could say, diagnosed injuries, like I have a rotator cuff tear, maybe I tore my ACL, maybe I broke my arm, maybe I tore my hamstrings. And actually, this would be a good point right here. We can talk about things with ribs too, but that would kind of fall into like, I have a diagnosed injury. Maybe you fall into the category of I've had a previous injury or surgery that I just need to, be considerate of. Or maybe you have a chronic condition like arthritis that just makes it challenging overall that you have pain. So within those, I'm curious within these categories where you might all fall right now. If you want to type that in the chat, what do you feel like best describes you? And depending on where you are, you might need some slightly different things, and that's gonna be okay. Before I get into what you might need, I do want to talk about basically like this pain scale right here. Now, I use this because I don't want anyone to train above a 3 out of 10 in terms of pain. So not like muscle soreness, but actual pain, like sharp pain, dull pain. I don't want you to be training above a 3 out of 10 in terms of pain. If that's the case, what we want to do is we want to start to change some things within your program, and we'll talk about that. So what I really want to cover today, the goal for today, it's not how do we fix necessarily what's going on or what's wrong. It's how can we safely exercise even though we might have some things that make exercise hard to do. So we're gonna figure out what's on your exercise menu, what are you capable of doing? So this is the kind of 4-step flow chart that I will use if somebody has an injury. The first thing I always want to check is technique. Like, are you doing the exercise correctly? If you are doing the exercise correctly and it's still giving you pain, we want to figure out how we can modify the exercise. And I'll show you what that looks like. If you can modify the exercise and that still causes you pain, then we need to change the exercise. So it'll give you a different exercise to do. And if no matter what you're doing, you still have pain, I would recommend physical therapy. And if you're in the category of I tore my ACL or I tore my rotator cuff, you're probably going to be utilizing physical therapy anyways. And we can still also ask the question, what can we still do for training even while we have an injury? So I do want to start out by saying that pain is an extremely complex thing, especially things like chronic low back pain. It's a wild thing where a lot of different things can influence your own personal experience of pain. But I will focus on knowing that this is not the full picture of pain. I will focus more of a mechanical kind of loading. I'll use that for a view of how we can actually take control of our pain and make sure that we can still train safely. So what we'll focus on is really just a combination of your overall training volume and technique. I think that those are really important things to consider when we're trying to manage pain. So what's training volume? Training volume is the number of sets that you do times the reps that you do times the load. So let's just say I did 3 sets of 10 of a squat, and let's just say I did 10 pounds. That's 3 times 10 times 10. So that's 300 pounds of volume. If that causes me pain, we might want to like drop off on the volume a little bit. So maybe instead of doing 3 sets of 10 with 10, maybe we do 1 set of 10 with 10. If we're looking at this from an aerobics perspective, we'll mostly talk about strength training today, but your total volume would be distance covered times the intensity of the aerobics that you're doing. So from a just mechanistic, mechanical standpoint, high volumes of training with improper technique can aggravate or exacerbate any of the issues that we have. So let me show you what that would look like. Let's say that I was just bending down like this to tie my shoe, or let's just say I bent over like this 10 times. Like, this is not good technique for an exercise that's called the Romanian deadlift. You might have seen this on your plan. The Romanian deadlift looks like that. So because of that flexion, I might put stress on my back, but I have no load. So I have no real training volume that I need to focus on. So I could probably do this all day and I wouldn't have any issues. But if I picked up a heavy weight and I did this, so that's adding volume to what I'm doing, that can cause some issues. So this is where kind of we want to focus on technique first. We want to make sure that everything that we're doing looks correct technique-wise. So technique is going to be really, really important. And before I get into some more practical examples, I do want to remind all of you that I have a chair-based training plan. This is a completely seated training plan. It can be found within your body weight and also in the dumbbell training plan. So if you have issues where getting up and down off the ground is challenging, I would encourage you to look at those plans. So I just talked about technique. Let's talk about technique with exercises. What I'm going to do is today we'll talk about basically technique and loading as filtered through some very common movement patterns. So for example, this is an image of a squat exercise. On the left side, you'll see that this is proper technique, but on the right side, this person's knees are caving in. That's gonna put a lot of stress on the knees. So it's not that, a lot of times people will say, okay, the doctor told me I shouldn't squat, or the doctor told me I shouldn't lunge. Well, one, we wanna make sure that you're doing it correctly. And 2, we want to make sure that even if you're doing it correctly and it still causes you pain, you know how to change the exercise to make it a lot more joint friendly. So if somebody told me they had knee pain and I saw that they were squatting like the image on the right, I would say the first thing that we need to do is make sure that we clear up your technique. And it's the same thing with like a deadlift, or this is called a hinge-based movement. This is one of the movements that we'll cover. If your hinge looked like this, or if you notice that this person has a lot of flexion in their back. So if you're flexing in your back and you told me this exercise hurts my back, well, that wouldn't be that surprising because of the technical errors, okay? And I promise I won't bog you down with biomechanics, but this is a relatively important concept for modifying exercises. Now, if you look at the image on the left, you'll notice that the knees are not as far forward as the image on the right. Okay, so there's a greater knee angle. Basically, what I want you to get out of this, and I'm going to show you a video of, we can change. So these are both squat exercises. One's going to be a little bit more knee friendly, and one's going to be a little bit more back friendly. Okay. So just depending on what you're doing, you can modify the biomechanics of the exercise to make it more favorable for whatever kind of joint issue you might have. So here's gonna be a practical example of a younger version of me, which looks like I have a mustache. A younger version of me with potentially a mustache, showing you how to modify. This is called a trap bar deadlift, but you can do, basically this deadlift is going to be identical to if you were using a barbell, which I don't actually prescribe, but if you maybe have been using like a kettlebell or a dumbbell. The first one that you're going to see me do is going to be one that's very knee friendly, but maybe not as back friendly. So this one puts very little stress on the knee. I'm not bending my knee that much. I'm training my glutes and my hamstrings, but because I'm leaning forward a lot, that does put more stress on your back, okay? So now, it's again, a very similar exercise. I'm gonna show you an intermediate one that's gonna probably be back friendly and also will be still knee friendly. So notice that I'm a little bit more upright at the bottom right here. So it's less stress on my back and a little bit more stress on my knees. But notice my knees aren't that far forward. Just keep your eyes on that knee angle. So that's going to be a way to modify that exercise to make it more back friendly. I can continue to make that more back friendly by being more upright, so less stress on my back. Notice my knees are a little bit further forward on this one. So these are basically examples of how you can modify an exercise. What am I listening to? Nelly in the background or something? I don't know. I used to get to lift at BU. And sometimes they play, was that Nelly? I don't know. Anyways, so what we'll talk about today is examples of positions to avoid. And we'll talk about, let's say like wrist pain, knee pain, low back pain, and shoulder pain. And we'll filter that through some very common movements. So when I say common movements, I mean, I'll actually walk you through all of these. So our lower body movements that are very common, this is a hinge. So a hinge is anything like a Romanian deadlift like this. And I want you to notice that, so this, because I'm leaning forward quite a bit, that puts more stress on my back. So if you have back issues, either A, we want to pick a hinge that's more back friendly, or B, we want to make sure that you're not having too much training volume. So this is the hinge, and that exercise really works your hamstrings, your glutes, versus the squat, still a lower body exercise, but that one is going to work more the front of your legs, your quads. So if you have any issues with knee pain or low back pain, that might be something that we need to change. Lunges are probably the one that's the most common where people tell me this bothers my knees. There's a lot of different ways that you can do a lunge that can make that more joint friendly. So a lunge would be, for example, this right here, okay? Then we have pressing based exercises. So if I was lying down on a bench, doing a dumbbell bench press, or if I was maybe doing a push-up, you can press horizontally like this, and you can also press vertically, so that overhead pressing position, that might be bothersome if you have any kind of shoulder pain. And then the last, so before I get into core, then you have rowing. So a rowing exercise would be maybe where I'm holding a weight and pulling up just like this. Generally quite user friendly. It might bother some people's shoulders if there's some technical errors. And then we'll talk about different core exercises and how we can make sure that we pick the one that's going to be more low back friendly. Yeah, core exercises to standing. All right, so I actually have a few more people that I want to make sure that they get into the waiting room. Okay, one sec. It's not letting me click anymore, but I think that is going to be this. So let's cover all of these things. And I want to make sure that my video camera also has it up there. So has anyone experienced pain? You can type this into the chat too, for the hinge movement. So that's if you saw Romanian deadlift in your plan, an exercise just like this, okay? Has anyone experienced pain on that one? You can type that in the chat. But I want to show you how to actually make sure that you're doing this correct. And I think that this is a really, really great exercise that you need to practice technique first, okay? So I would nail this with very light weight before you move on to heavier weight. So I'm just gonna let a few more folks in. So yeah, if this bothers your back, this Romanian deadlift look like this, what I would recommend doing is, one, let's try to practice this in the mirror. So this is going for the first thing, technique. Let's make sure technique is good. If you're looking at yourself in the mirror, you want to make sure that when you're going down, you're not flexing like that. That's kind of step number one where a lot of people make errors, is they flex in their back. So you want to make sure that you're keeping your back as straight as you can. The other error that people make is they stand up and they extend at their low back at the top instead of using their butt at the top. So if you've ever experienced low back pain in that movement, a lot of times it's because of those two things. Flexion on the way down or too much extension in your back on the way up. Your glutes are supposed to be the main driver of this movement. So your hips tilt this way, that's called an anterior tilt, and they tilt that way, it's called a posterior tilt. You start the movement with an anterior tilt and then push your hips backwards. On the top, you do a posterior tilt and you squeeze your butt, and that's gonna really help to protect the low back. As long as your glutes are driving that action, that's gonna help protect the back. Now, a way to make this exercise a lot more joint friendly, I'm just gonna let another person in, is to swap it out for a what's called a sumo deadlift. So this is gonna be the most low back friendly deadlift variation outside of potentially the trap bar deadlift. So for this one, it's still a hinge. I'm still pushing my hips back. But what I'm doing is I have a wider stance and I'm pushing my hips back and I'm bending my legs more, and I'm still doing that squeeze of my hips right at the top, okay? So with the hinge, I would say that's probably the most joint-friendly variation of that type of movement. So I hear squats as causing knee pain a lot. Can you just type in the chat if a squat has caused you knee pain in the past? And I'm gonna let another person in. So have squats caused you knee pain? Is that something that's bothered your knees? Yeah, this one is really, really common, and I wanna make sure that you know how to do that correctly, okay? Because a lot of times I've spoken to people where they say, oh, squats are really causing me knee pain, and then I see how they're squatting, and I say, okay, well, we can change this to make it a lot more joint friendly. So I think let's make sure everyone can at least see my toes on here. Let's say that you were doing a squat and you did it like this. Now notice that my toes are coming up and my knees are going really far forward. So I'm coming up on my toes. That's gonna put a lot of stress on your knees, okay? So even if I was squatting and it looked like this, like a typical kind of squat, my feet are shoulder width apart, my toes are pointed out just slightly. Even if I squatted like this and notice my knees are going forward, that still might bother your knees. And I do want to show you how to modify it, but I also want to show you from the front. If you're squatting and your knees are wiggling in like this, that also might be an issue. So when you squat down, I want you to think about driving your hips or your knees out, okay? So that's gonna be how we make sure that we're doing it correctly. So let's make sure that we have that cleared up. But let's just say you were doing it correctly and it was still bothering you. This is gonna be your fix. So we control the range of motion and we change the exercise just slightly, okay? So for the squat, that might mean we're not going down all the way. It means that we are going to sit. I want you to, if squats bother your knees, try this one. I promise you it's gonna be a lot better. So we're going to sit back more. It means we're going to lean forward more and we're not going to go down as far, okay? So this is how that exercise is going to look. Look at the angle of my shins. So the squat that's probably a little bit less knee friendly is where I have a big shin angle. My knees are going forward and I'm going up, versus this, my shins stay more vertical and I'm sitting back more, okay? That is a much friendlier variation of the squat if you have any kind of knee pain. Now, what about the lunge? Does that cause you knee pain at all? You can type that into the chat too. Do lunges have they caused you any knee pain? Yeah. And you can type that one in the chat. Yeah, squats and lunges, yep. Yep, and Catherine actually made a good, so like a box squat is one where you end up sitting back more into it, which really kind of just mimics what we just did. Yeah, lunges, super common for knee pain, especially if you're doing the forward lunge like that. That's probably the #1 culprit. So a much more friendly, I'm gonna give you a few more and I'm gonna progressively make them more and more knee friendly. The first more knee friendly lunge variation is a reverse lunge. A reverse lunge takes a lot of the stress off that knee, and notice again, I'm dealing with a vertical tibia, vertical shin for this exercise. That one still might cause knee pain, okay? And that wouldn't be uncommon. you still want to look out for some of the similar things that I showed you on the squat. My knee is not going too far forward like that. I'm not coming up on my toe. I'm not letting my knee wiggle in like that when I'm doing that exercise. But let me show you a way to make this even more knee friendly. Same exact concept as the turning the squat into more of a hip hinge based exercise. So for the lunge, we take a smaller step back and you lean forward more, okay? Lean forward more, just like this, okay? So if we can do that, again, see, I'm leaning forward more, takes a lot of the stress off of the knee, okay? That's gonna be probably the best thing that you can do. I do this in all of the training plans. If you have knee pain, you do your lunge more like this. You can also imagine I had something that I could hold on to right here. Hold on to a wall when you do that. That helps as well, okay? So the themes here, especially for knees, are sit back more. Don't let your knee track too far forward. Now, I wanna get into some pressing movements as well. Does anyone have any shoulder pain that they might be dealing with? And you can type that into the chat too. Any shoulder pain? I probably would say that the knee pain seems to be the most common. But yeah, go ahead and type that into the chat. Okay, we got one. I'm gonna show you on a bench, and I'm gonna show you how to make shoulder exercises a lot more friendly. I'm gonna grab a pair of weights just so you can see what that looks like. Okay. So for shoulders, probably the biggest thing that you want to avoid is what's called the high five position. This is the high five position right here. Okay? Let me go down like this so people can see me. It's the high five position. So if I was pressing overhead like this, I wouldn't be surprised if that caused some shoulder issues. The high five position in a pressing movement out this way is this position. So if I was doing push-ups or something like this, that is also probably potentially going to put you in a position where if you have shoulder pain, it's going to make it worse. Now, some people just going overhead is going to be bothersome. I would encourage you, because I think maintaining overhead range of motion, I think it's extremely important to be able to do that for as long as possible. If you struggle with overhead range of motion without pain, that is something that A, maybe you get a little bit stronger and that helps too, but B, it's definitely worth looking into physical therapy for that if you can't get your hands over your head. But a better position for your shoulders for overhead movement is elbows in, pressing up like this, my palms are facing each other, and I'm coming down to right here. Now with a press, with like a lying down, so if I was lying down and doing a dumbbell chest press, which you'll probably see in our programs, again, I don't want to be in this position. I want to be down in this position, okay? So I want to be pressing from right here. Anywhere from here to here is going to be a lot more shoulder friendly than going up to here, okay? So I do want to get through a few more of these just in our allotted time. And I do want to add, if you were in the camp of where you said, I had like a surgery, or I have like a hip impingement or something like that. I think I just saw that one in here. I am available to talk. I would, on an individual basis, I would encourage you to try some of our plans and also try some of the tricks that I've shown you on here, and let me know how that goes. Remember that this is all, it's a function of just again, from the mechanical standpoint, it is going to be a function in part, not entirely, of the overall training volume that you do plus positioning. So make sure that you're working on good technique with light load. I don't think that you need to go right into really heavy strength training right off the bat. If there are very joint friendly exercises that you can push yourself on, but on some ones that were potentially more complex, it's okay if you start out lighter and then try to just work on technique first. But let's do rowing, because that I do think is probably one of the easier ones that you can do. where it's not gonna end up causing pain. So I'm just gonna, so a row, for example, would be, you know, if I had my hand on the bench, my knee on the bench, and I'm rowing up from right here like that. Probably the only instance where that exercise might end up bothering somebody's shoulder, and I'll get a little bit closer so you can see, is if I went up like this and I also rotated forwards like that. If you can see my shoulder rotating forward in that position like that. So I want to be right here, avoiding that forward kind of rotating position. Now, I do want to get into a little bit of core things. So generally speaking, people that have low back pain, again, just in generality, it might be bothered by rotation, it might be bothered by flexion, or your back pain might be bothered by extension. So flexion, move this camera down too. So flexion would be exercises like a crunch. So if I'm going like this, or a sit up, I'm flexing at my back. Rotation would be something like a Russian twist, okay? So that's rotation. And then going into too much extension, only if you have errors in it, would be something like, hey, let's say I was doing a plank, but I was doing my plank like this. So that wouldn't be surprising if I did my plank like that and that bothered my back. So if you're not tolerant to flexion, like the crunch or the sit-ups, maybe you want to look into like the two other types of exercises, maybe like the rotations, or exercises where you prevent. So a plank is technically an exercise where I prevent extension. The goal is for me not to do that. If you're bothered by extension but not flexion, maybe you would benefit more from some of the crunch-based variations. If you're intolerant to rotation, there's also options where you can basically resist rotation. So that might look like a Palloff press, which is where you have a cable, press out, and then you hold, and you're using your core muscles to make sure that you don't get pulled into that position. So I know I'm hitting the 30-minute mark here. I will open this up if you have any specific circumstances that you'd like to share. I might be able to give you like, hey, this is like a quick tip. If I can't hit it with a quick tip, I'd recommend messaging your care team and scheduling a consult with me. My goal is to make sure that everything that you're doing for strength training, you feel confident that you can do it, you feel comfortable, and you're able to manage the pain that you have. So go ahead and type in the chat any specific questions that you have, and from there, like I said, I'll see if I can answer it quickly. So let me stop this filming.